Nightwing vs. Red Hood, the first prodigal son of Batman versus the dark, tragedy-stricken second Robin. Many fans of the Bat family question who between the two would come out on top in a fight, and I'd go as far to say it's the most interesting and compelling matchup possibly found within Gotham City. Today, I'll be analyzing each character to determine who would win. A lot of factors go into a fight, such as the characters' mentalities and approach to combat. For the sake of this video, I'll be approaching it as if Nightwing and Red Hood are engaged in a hypothetical battle wherein neither former Robin is holding back. They are each at the peak of physical condition, and they each want victory to the utmost. Nightwing is much more against killing than Jason, obviously. However, whether or not Todd wants to kill Nightwing won't make that much of a difference, as I will demonstrate. To make an accurate assessment of each character as a combatant, I'm going to chart their battles over the years, both against one another as well as those both fighters have encountered respectively. I'm only going to be considering feats and statements from the main continuity DC comic universe, no games or alternate Elseworlds storylines. I don't care about vampires or zombies, I'm talking about the actual canon DC universe. Something many need to realize when looking at comic book characters is how consistently they tend to improve over the decades of publication history. For example, it would be asinine for me to compare Jason Todd as Robin versus Dick Grayson as Nightwing from his latest issue as an example, because we all know that the former grows in prowess as he trains, learns through combat, adapts, etc. This is pretty much true for all DC martial artists especially. There are many instances of characters having trained on and off panel, developing new techniques and greater confidence. The specific journeys of these two Bat family members will be explicitly explained henceforth, but keep in mind that we are comparing the characters as they are currently as of October 2022, when they are essentially at their peaks of skill, at least for now. This is comics, so it could always change. There's like a dozen different Bat books in circulation right now, which could feature a new fight with either combatant that could supersede what I'm about to detail. By that same token, however, the earlier in DC's history we look into, naturally the less relevant those fights will be when determining who would actually win at the moment. This isn't so much about tallying up all of their wins and losses, judging it that way, because again, saying Red Hood or Nightwing lost in 2007 doesn't mean they'd lose again in the current year. So much happens in comics in so little real-world time that they are essentially different characters in a combative sense the further along we go. With that said, however, let's look at each character's progress and finally where they stand as of late to determine who between the first and second Robin would win in a fight. After Jason was resurrected, he was trained by various masters of killing from across the globe, akin to Batman's initial quest, as well as being taught by the ancient society of assassins known as the All Caste. It's worth stating that chronologically and continuity-wise as it stands now, these events, while being retconned into having happened in the New 52, they would have taken place prior to the events of Under the Red Hood in the current timeline. Right now, every main continuity comic event is canon to DC, so one needs to understand that the Red Hood seen doing battle with Batman and Under the Red Hood had already undergone his all-cast training in the current canon, even if it was retconned. That is the case now. Starting in the early 2000s, 2002's Batman number 600 to be exact, Nightwing picks a fight with Batman, who has seemingly abandoned any trace of his Bruce Wayne identity, leaving Dick to wonder if the man who adopted him still exists. The two do battle, but it is fairly one-sided in the Dark Knight's favor, although Dick does get one good hit in, as opposed to Batman's 1-2 punch, with the pair more or less evading each other throughout the rest of the scrap. Neither party is totally in their right mind. Dick isn't sure if he even knows who he's talking to right now, as Batman's put Bruce Wayne aside. Nonetheless, moving on. Both Nightwing and Batman are then shown training with Richard Dragon, one of the top martial artists in the universe, surely bolstering both fighters' skills. To give some idea, Lady Shiva is probably the best martial artist in DC and has recently been shown one-shotting Batman, stating that every other time they had fought she was playing a role, and she considered Richard Dragon to be a rival or someone to contest with. So this is very Important to bring up. Jason then returns as the Red Hood. He combats the Dark Knight while actually not wanting to kill him, as revealed in Red Hood Lost Days. You can go quote-unquote all out in a fight without wanting to kill the other person. See MMA as an example. Those fighters are using the utmost of their power and technique, but they aren't trying to murder their opponents. So I don't think Jason's mindset in that regard makes much of a difference, but still. The Bat family are pretty much never trying to kill one another anyway, except when it comes to Jason versus Dick, which should make things interesting down the line. In his fight with Batman, he does fairly well, scoring the Dark Knight many times. However, Bruce is of course going to be off his game given the fact that the child he failed to save is back and on a murder spree. The Bat family are all melodramatic dorks, so these things are bound to happen more times than not, so it can get very annoying when in these types of cases. However, it is worth noting that Jason does push Batman into not holding back in that kind of MMA sense, where he then floors Jason with a combo. For those familiar with the Red Hood animated movie, this sequence is represented by Batman slamming Jason's head into a toilet to give you a further idea of what this looks like. Between issues of Under the Red Hood, Jason goes to Titan's Tower to mollywop Tim Drake, being portrayed as capable of physically dominating the third Robin. In 2006, as a part of the 1 year later event, Bruce, Dick, and Tim all redo Batman's foundational globe-trotting training over the course of a year. Interestingly, Grayson seems to already understand the nature of Bruce's training, meaning he likely had secondhand knowledge of it from when he was taught initially as Robin. Regardless, he would improve from learning firsthand the innumerable trials which mostly formed the Batman. The first actual fight between Nightwing and Red Hood takes place in Nightwing 118 and 119, Jason adorning a Nightwing costume to antagonize his senior. If it looks confusing, Jason has the shorter haircut, but honestly, even still, it is kind of confusing. With Dick having broken a leg and an arm combating a pair of metahumans just prior to this bout, Jason tags Dick. Dick acrobatically outmaneuvers Jason and kicks him in the back, downing Todd. Grayson judo tosses him, and the two grapple, leading to Dick hanging one-handed off a ledge. Jason slashes at his one good hand, causing Dick to fall. I think it's fair to say that if Nightwing wasn't working with half-functioning limbs, he'd bully Jason here, seeing as he got pretty good hits in all throughout. The two fight again in Outsiders Volume 3, number 44. Jason pulls up to just slide Grayson some info. Dick attacks first, which leads to Red Hood shooting at him with his handgun, meaning, you know, a proper fight has begun. Nightwing slings Jason into a building by a wire. Red Hood throws Dick to the floor. Grayson blocks a knife attack. Jason compliments Grayson's skill. Dick nearly impales Jason with glass overhead, kicks Todd in the face, where Jason does the same, gets tripped up, hit in the head by Neskrema, and slammed into a wall. Dick calls it a stalemate due to the fact that they each have their weapons drawn on each other, where Jason retorts that the bullet from his gun would sooner kill Grayson than he'd be able to crush his windpipe with his Neskrema. He also says that he does not want to kill Nightwing, but again, he also did not want to kill Batman. It's hard to judge this as anything other than a stalemate when judging points, like a boxing match. However, when looking at it from a skill perspective, Dick did end the fight by pushing Jason into a wall. I wouldn't call Jason just having a gun to point at Dick a skill, and would sooner argue that Red Hood ultimately got outmaneuvered here. It's like, imagine Bruce Lee fighting Chuck Norris, and they have like a back and forth hand-to-hand encounter, but then Bruce Lee pins Chuck Norris, but he just decides to like blow himself up with a suicide vest, you know? It's not really like a skill per se. Of course, Jason wasn't trying to kill Dick in this instance, but again, Grayson isn't going for the kill either. In terms of raw fighting prowess, I think Nightwing edges Jason out slightly, with Red Hood having a conditional advantage given the explicitly lethal nature of his loadout. In the next year, in Detective Comics 838, a high-ranking League of Shadows member named Ubu states Nightwing to be a rival to Batman after seeing how effortlessly he laid out a squad of ninjas. There have been many Ubus, with prior holders of the title having fought Batman directly, and they should all have a good understanding of the Dark Knight's measure throughout the years, as Ra's himself, the organization's leader, has fought Batman and has been stated to be his rival many times. So by that, Nightwing 3 years after Under the Red Hood could defeat that Jason at that time just as swiftly as Batman did in the tail end of that story, per this statement. In Batgirl 2008 number 1, Nightwing finds Cassandra all alone in the Batcave and gets suspicious. He attacks her where she evades and disarms him, but he then says that eventually he will attack her in a way she won't see coming, and he'll have her beat. Later, into 2008, Red Robin would have a rematch with Jason, where, in line with their last encounter, Drake realizes that he can't take Red Hood head on. He does state, though, that Nightwing would, quote-unquote, clean his clock. Tim Drake being one of the most analytically sound fighters in DC. Batman notes in Rebirth that he has the best tactical mind of any protege he's ever worked with, and he shares Batman's tendency to analyze and document the abilities of other superheroes. He's also a bit of a power scaler himself, mentally comparing the skill of Ra's al Ghul to Batman, which I mentioned earlier. In February of 2009, Nightwing and Cassandra Cain go blow for blow, with Dick agitated over her plan to assemble a squad featuring various supervillains hoping to make up for the, at the time, absence of Batman. Battle for the Cowl is probably Nightwing and Red Hood's most famous encounter. Jason's lost his mind, but is still fighting intelligently. Dick gets electrocuted by one of Batman's capes before the battle. Nightwing floors Jason with a punch, launches him with a kick, followed by another punch. Jason retorts with batarangs to the face. Dick breaks Todd's nose with a headbutt, actually stating that he needs to hold back his anger from that point on. He knees Jason, kicks him in the face, where Jason resorts to blasting Nightwing with fear toxin, allowing Todd to get a hit in. Dick still lands a kick, where then Red Hood just says "F it" and blows up the entire arena, hoping to make a getaway. The fight leads to atop a moving train. Dick drop kicks Jason, and Jason lands a right hook, with Nightwing ending the battle with a well-timed kick. He regrets having to put too much power behind it, as it leaves Jason dangling off the side of a train and letting go. A pretty heavy-handed victory for Nightwing. He was holding himself back, which is in contrast to Batman in Under the Red Hood, who felt like he had to go all out to quickly down Jason. So again, very impressive. He was also wounded before a punch was ever thrown, and got the victory while his senses were bombarded by Scarecrow's formula, which was explicitly stated to disorient him. The pair next have a brief encounter in 2009's Batman and Robin #5, where Dick, as Batman, was able to get Jason in an armbar and slam him face first into the floor, despite Red Hood having been alerted just prior. Grayson's then seen throttling Jason, standing over him, seemingly gotten the better of him off panel, before he gets distracted by Damian's well-being and is laid out by a point-blank shot to the chest. Again, it seems like Dick is the better fighter per se, but a gun is a gun, and Grayson can be tagged in certain situations when his thoughts are elsewhere. Into the New 52 era, Dick says he's better than ever after having been Batman for a time. Jason and Red Hood in the Outlaws is shown defeating Lady Shiva, someone who pretty objectively manhandled Batman and Nightwing up to that point. However, Red Hood himself says it'd be impossible to keep up with Shiva in an outright battle, and uses techniques taught to him by Shiva to incapacitate her directly. With Bronze Tiger, someone pretty objectively less skilled than Shiva, stating there are no shortcuts to defeating him, leading to Starfire having to save Jason from him. This comes across as Jason simply having a kind of kryptonite for Shiva, as opposed to being more skilled than her, and it wouldn't work against other fighters. It's like when Nick Fury whispered something specific to Thor's character into the God of Thunder's ears to depower him. Saying Gore was right to Jane Foster Thor isn't going to do anything. Same goes for Jason trying these Shiva-specific shortcuts against Bronze Tiger, or Batman, or Nightwing. In fact, future Tim, in one storyline, actually had discovered in the future that Jason had a bone spur that never grew right and was able to target it and down him, despite the fact that future Tim outright says that he's simply not as skilled as any of the other Robins. So again, the same thing applies here. To further solidify this, Jason himself says issues later that he'd never be able to disarm Ra's under normal circumstances. Someone stated to rival Batman in the past. But if Jason is more skilled than Shiva, who is more skilled than Batman, this doesn't make any sense. It does, however, with what's stated in the Shiva battle and my interpretation of said statements. It's also funny that Jason needed saving from New 52 Bronze Tiger, as that same character was shown getting one shot by Midnighter, whom Nightwing outmaneuvered around that same time. In line with Nobu's prior utterance of Nightwing's skill, in Nightwing #30, Grayson defeats a going all-out Cape Crusader, as confirmed by the issue's writer.
To me, the story was Batman and Dick have a fight, and Dick wins. I wanted it to be, I love Dick Grayson, I think he could beat Batman in a fair fight. But when I say fight, I mean a fight where Batman doesn't hold back. Because if it's just a fight where Batman holds back and Dick wins, who cares? He doesn't have a victory.
Right.
So I wanted the fight to be Batman puts his all into it. He hits Dick with everything he's got, and Dick gets up and hits him back. And so it got bloody and it got bad. To me, that was Batman showing... I know it's a little twisted, but to me that was Batman showing him, look, I respect you enough to fight you like this. I'm not going to hold back. I'm not going to just ask. I'm not going to sort of be half of who the fighter I am. I'm going to fight you the way I wouldn't fight anybody, because you're Dick Grayson. You can beat me on this level. And that's the way I viewed it.
For as much as you may dislike Tom King, you can't deny how integral his authorship is to Batman and DC Comics to this day. In Batman and Robin Eternal issues 1 through 3, a mildly wounded Agent Grayson is pretty much outclassed by New 52 Cassandra Cain. He is, however, able to read the nature of her form and that she's holding back. Cass and Dick actually have a similar ability to read body language and intent, which is very much showcased in the New 52 and Rebirth. Grayson was actually able to deduce that Batman was Bruce Wayne via noticing shared subtleties between the two in his origin. In fact, in terms of body language or intent sensing, Grayson was actually able to see through Clayface's disguise sooner than Red Hood in 2021, so he'd logically be better than Jason in this capacity in recent years. She then encounters Red Hood, who is confident he can beat her, before being launched with a sidekick. He then states he can actually adapt to having his movements read by fighting in a way that not even he himself can predict, pretty much the same thing Nightwing said to Cass in 2008 if you remember, and slashes her across the chest before going for the kill, prior to being snuck up on and overpowered by Grayson. Dick says that Cass was actually trying to protect Jason, and later on notes that Cass never tried to beat either former Robin and was simply testing their characters. Dick attempted a dialogue and inquired as to why she was holding back, whereas Jason went straight for the kill. An extension of her intent is shown later when she identifies that Todd thinks with his fists and Grayson with his heart, which is consistent with the scenes just prior. So essentially, Cassandra never tried to beat either of them and was seeing how they'd react to the given situation. Jason was fighting to kill Cain, in contrast to Grayson, whom it would be very out of character for him to even go all out on a little girl he's never met who he can read isn't trying to kill him. Cassandra is kind of an outlier anyway in the New 52 Bat family, as in she has a totally different backstory and history than her post-crisis counterpart and lacks many of her best feats, making her essentially a new character until arguably Superman Reborn in 2017, where it's implied many elements of post-crisis merge with the New 52 across the universe. Only 3 years after Nightwing beat a not holding back Batman, Red Hood stated that he probably couldn't beat Batman in a fair fight and resorts to using a suit-mounted taser to down the Dark Knight, a piece of tech that Nightwing also boasts and is in fact stronger than Batman's own in-suit taser. It is worth noting that both Bruce and Jason hold back against one another. Todd even mocks Batman for holding back. Red Hood, however, feels the opposite towards Nightwing, stating in Rebirth that until very recently, he'd try to kill Grayson where he stands, essentially meaning that for most of their encounters, Jason's actually fighting harder against Grayson than he would be against Batman, who he figures he'd lose to on even ground anyway. In Event Leviathan number 3, Red Hood manages to evade a group of vigilantes, including Green Arrow, Damian Wayne, and Batman. Jason intently, narrowly misses shooting Bruce in the head, where then, after scuffling with Plastic Man, Damian rashly pursues Jason directly at the behest of Batman. The three tumble into a pool, where Jason tags Batman, Damian tags Jason, Batman tags Jason, until finally Red Hood appears to cloak the two within Batman's cape and makes his escape off panel. He later manages to deflect a net arrow onto the dynamic duo, ensnaring them. It's an impressive display of escape artistry. However, I think we can all agree that evading an attacker and actually counterattacking are two different skill sets. Just because I can dodge certain attacks does not make me a quote-unquote better fighter, especially when Bruce and Damian collectively score more hits against Red Hood than otherwise. Around this time, Rick Grayson is then implanted with a lifetime of memories by the Court of Owls, granting him deadlier training than what Batman offered him, similar to Jason's training prior to Under the Red Hood, and is stated to be the greatest Talon of them all, logically greater than Lincoln March, who was an active Talon around that time, and is someone who could physically dominate Bruce Wayne in the early New 52 and as recently as 2020. He'd as well be deadlier than the same Talons who forced Jason to go all out in the New 52. Joker then, yet again, overwrites Dick's mind, implanting new memories and the persona of Dickie Boy, who does battle against pretty much the entire Bat family. He fights Batgirl, who calls him Batman's equal, adding to that consistency, but notes that his brainwashing has nerfed him, allowing her to get some hits in. This is evident as Punchline, Joker's new lackey, was able to incapacitate Barbara fairly quickly. But with Nightwing's mind restored, he's able to utterly bully Punchline. He even says to her that as Dickie Boy, he'd forgotten a lifetime of training before he demolishes her. So essentially, Dickie Boy is capable of being tagged by someone below Punchline, whereas Nightwing proper is in a whole other tier above Punchline. This is all relevant as Dickie Boy had a blow-for-blow fight with Red Hood in 2020's Red Hood Outlaw number 48, with Jason shown going for the kill throughout the fight. So a heavily nerfed Grayson going equal against Jason means he'd perform far better against this killer instinct Red Hood after having his mind restored. In fact, Nightwing going forward has all the memories of his various lives, including all of the new deadly training afforded to him by the Court of Owls. So essentially, Nightwing post-Joker war would dominate this 2020 era Red Hood. Task Force Z number 6 from 2022 shows us Jason and Bruce's latest physical scuffle, wherein after being tortured, Jason has a punch blocked, a kick dodged, launched by a strike, and finally lands a kick on the world's greatest detective, which he just eats, before breaking down and mentioning how he knows he'll never measure up to Bruce or Dick. 2 issues later, after Jason is healed up, Nightwing is rightly suspicious that Jason stole something, says he doesn't want to fight Jason, and then eats a cheap shot. He then floors a battle-ready Red Hood with a kick. Tim and Cassandra Cain pull up. Tim Drake is pretty inconsequential here. As I already said, Tim knows he can't take Jason head on, and even if he went all out, Red Hood would likely still beat him pretty soundly based on that. Safe to say, Cass is holding back as stated in the issue and would mollywop Jason otherwise. Todd's even afraid of Cass and considers her the toughest among the Bat family, which makes sense as her post-crisis scaling would be very much restored after Death Metal, which had taken place prior. The reason I keep bringing up Cassandra is due to the fact that she's arguably the most skilled fighter in all of DC, probably just below her mother Shiva most consistently, although that's likely due to the fact that Cass is not a killer. Batman in Rebirth states he'd straight up lose to Cass, which is even evident as far back as her initial appearances in Post-Crisis. The same Batman Jason thinks he'd lose to? If she were going all out, which is honestly pretty far outside of her character, as she actually has to make an effort not to use killing techniques, as that's all she was taught as a child. It's fair to compare characters' performances against the typical restricted Cass that would be seen in, say, that 2008 Batgirl versus Nightwing fight, which is why I consider her a valid point of comparison here. In fact, we know Cass is holding back here, which would likely mean she's actually holding back to an even greater degree than she typically is. Anyway, all 3 Bat family members kick Jason, where he seemingly planned to be launched by said kick into one of his cohorts to pass off what he had stolen to her under everyone else's noses. Dick then tags him in the head with an Eskrima. Jason knocks the wind out of Tim, incapacitates Cassandra via electrocuting the water underneath her, where then Jason actually says Dick and Tim are faster and no weaker than he is, stating he'd win simply because he is always more willing to hurt them than vice versa, breaking Drake's nose with a crowbar to prove his point. Jason evades the holding back Tim and Cassandra. He's then tagged by Cass, kicks Tim, and backhands Nightwing into the path of a moving train. Jason saves Dick, where Nightwing then says, "Thanks. Sucks about the cheap shot though."
What cheap?
knocking Jason's helmet off, something that no other member of the Bat family were able to do up until that point in that fight, and bloodying his face. Jason says he was holding back. Dick disagrees and offers to untie Jason and actually settle it, confident he'd win despite everything. Cass, with her advanced body reading ability, states that Jason was working to keep the group unbalanced with his taunts and actions. Remember when I mentioned all the melodrama, holding back, not holding back stuff throughout this video? This issue is that bullshit to the extreme. Putting it all together, the only thing I can think we can confidently compare is the effects of the sucker punches. Even if we grant that Jason was holding back, Dick we know for a fact is, and his cheap shot does far more damage compared to Jason's. Otherwise, we have Jason possibly holding back, while at the same time evidently putting forth more effort, as shown when he attacks Tim. We also don't know if he's lying about the Dick and Tim being faster and just as tough as he is statement. Cass is also a pretty surefire source when she says Jason's got the crew off their game with his talk no jutsu, so it's also not a good showing of their typical skill, on top of them all holding back as a fact. I'm really not trying to downplay Red Hood here. It's very impressive that he's able to keep up with multiple holding back Bat family members at all. It's just that this issue is clearly intentionally written in a vague way where you can believe whatever you want at the end of the day. Is he holding back? Is he not holding back? Dick then goes on to train recruits at Titan's Academy, and as of the latest quote-unquote current time DC event Dark Crisis, a heavily wounded Nightwing flat out defeats Deathstroke. And what I mean by current time is during Task Force Z, we still see that Batman is around and alive and kicking. However, currently, as of Dark Crisis and the feats I'm about to mention, Batman was seemingly killed by Pariah and sent to a sort of paradise dream dimension, whatever. So all of the feats henceforth are regarding a Nightwing who has been training beyond the Task Force Z appearance, whatever you think of that anyway. In Dark Crisis, a heavily wounded Nightwing flat out defeats Deathstroke, someone who stalemated Batman in 2020, with the Dark Knight barely edging out Slade in a drag-out fight where Deathstroke actually lost on purpose. Nightwing took a bomb point blank to the face, is clutching his arm and talking warily, and defeats Slade in a single splash page. Wilson's even going against his plan to not kill any Titan for the sake of Grayson, and he still admits to losing. Compare this wounded Dick to the same wounded Jason who is pretty much outclassed by Batman in Task Force Z, someone who always holds back against Jason. Deathstroke and Batman are shown to be in the same tier, if not Slade being slightly superior, and Grayson, who could barely move, won. This is the absolute latest scaling chain, taking all of Nightwing and Red Hood's training and character progressions into account. Jason was able to get the better of New 52 Deathstroke in 2016, 8 years before this Dark Crisis feat, albeit Slade at the time was nerfed by neurotoxin, so it's not really fair to compare even aside from the time discrepancy. A lot of people see Red Hood using guns and killing and assume he'd be a deadlier fighter than Nightwing and therefore win. I don't think those people are aware of Grayson's League of Shadows training as a child, being taught by someone who could give Batman at the time the smoke, as seen in Robin Year 1, or his deadly lifetime of Talon training. Deathstroke's in fact called the deadliest and greatest mercenary on Earth many times, with Nightwing having bested Slade on numerous instances. Jason was at one time enhanced by the super drug Venom, making him faster and stronger. However, he only had access to the formula for 2 days before abandoning the drug, as it reminded him of his mother's addictive nature. Even still, the best feat Jason has when on Venom is arguably overpowering New 52 Supergirl's grip, which at its most wanked interpretation doesn't make much sense, as Jason states he's on the same Venom Bane uses, with Bane being demonstrably weaker than Kryptonian tier characters. And even still, if we're gonna consider feats that don't make any sense given the wider context and consistency, Grayson still has Todd beat, as he performed the best up until then against a Batman possessing a measure of Superman's powers who had just one-shot Bane in post-Crisis. So taking less consistent high-tier scaling into account, Nightwing is still shown superior. Jason also at one time possessed the All Blades, a twin set of magic swords. However, they're stated to only be available to Jason when in the presence of pure evil, which, safe to say, will not be effective against Nightwing. He also hasn't used them in character since 2020, favoring a pair of electric crowbars in more recent years. There really isn't anything in Red Hood's current kit that Nightwing hasn't dealt with plenty. He's even stopped using guns as of late. All in all, Nightwing has a far better win record, more impressive scaling, and better feats than Red Hood. In a scenario where both parties are on their A game and giving it their all, Nightwing's simply shown greater martial prowess when comparing his bouts against Batman or other master assassins when compared to Red Hood's battles against those very same opponents. He's beaten Jason many times in the past, whereas Todd lacked any kind of concrete victory against Grayson. His greater combat abilities and physical constitution would lead to a genuine fight between the two to look fairly one-sided in the prodigal son's favor. I think Jason's best chance is using the kind of mind games that we saw him using in Task Force Z. However, at the same time, it's been shown many times that Dick Grayson has knowledge of the weaknesses of many heroes throughout the DC universe, with villains trying to peer into his brain and steal that information, with one of those heroes shown being Red Hood, which it may very well be a similar situation to feature Tim, knowing the placement of Red Hood's bone spurs and therefore an explicit weakness he could exploit. But again, this is about if both characters are on their A game and giving it their all. And if that's the case, I really can't see Red Hood winning more times than Nightwing, to be honest. But that's just my opinion. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.
Yeah.